Good day everyone, welcome to Pointy Hat Weekend. We have to go over the raid. We have to go over the raid because we have forgotten about it for the last couple of weeks or so. We have gotten interrupted by things like the creation catalyst becoming available, things like the leaks of the next expansion followed by the reveal of the next expansion, so we kind of got sidetracked. It's time to go back to our weekly update. This time we're gonna go for the raid. Eventually, soon, we will do Mythic Plus as well. We have some pretty interesting and exciting changes for some specs, but first we have to start with the more boring side of the video, which is the popularity, which specs are becoming more popular. When it comes to the DPS, there is an obvious change, which is the one that Destruction is now more popular. Destruction has increased by almost 5 times compared to a couple of weeks ago. They are now just barely in the top half of specs. The result, obviously, is that Demonology is losing popularity because, of course, more players are switching to Destro. The other change, we were excited a couple of weeks ago because Survival got out of the bottom 7 specs. They were at the most popular they have ever been since they have been a melee spec. Now they are actually out of the bottom 8 specs. Now Survival is even getting closer. They are sieging Retribution Paladin to try to pass him as well. As far as popularity for DPS was concerned, this is pretty much what we have gotten in the last couple of weeks. Not really anything changed for tanks, but we did get some interesting changes for healers on the other hand. We pointed out last week that Holy Priest was of course the most popular and Holy Paladin just barely passed Resto Shaman. There was a decent gap, a significant gap between Resto Shaman and Restoration Druid, right? This week things have gotten a little bit more muddy because while Holy Priest is still ahead, in fact even more ahead than before, Resto Shaman has gone again up on top of Holy Paladin, this time with a quite decent gap between the two, about 10% more. What is more important is that Resto Druid has kept rising significantly compared to last week. Now they are the ones that are sieging Holy Paladin to pass them as the third most played healer in the raid. So this one is the more significant of the changes when it comes to healers. Of course, Mistweaver is quite a few ways down compared to the other 4 specs, and then you have Discipline, which is much further down because of the dominance of Holy. However, there are more exciting things to talk about than just popularity, which is the damage, the performance of the specs. As we go in our ranking so far this week, this day, it's worth mentioning once again that these rankings are based on the progression on the bosses that are killed. So as we go by week and more of the top bosses get killed, the damage will reflect the damage profile from those bosses. So we stopped at the first 4 to 5 bosses. Now, 2 weeks later, we can start incorporating progression, logs and numbers from Lihuvim, from Halondrus, from Anduin, even Lords of Dread and Raigelon. So you start getting more and more of these logs. The result is that the comparison between last week and this week is as follows. So, after a few seconds to judge what has been happening, I am going to give you a chart of the changes, the most significant changes at the very least. Because when it comes to the DPS changes in the last couple of weeks, the most improved of the DPS specs, at the very least on the rankings, is Retribution Paladin. Retribution Paladin has gone up 7 ranks compared to a couple of weeks ago, a couple of resets ago, so quite significant of an increase. It's not that exciting because they were towards the bottom half, now they are towards the top half, so the increase is not massive, but it is worth mentioning. Another one of the good increases are going to go to Frost Death Knight and Windwalker, whom both increased by 5 rankings compared to 2 resets ago. Another couple of positive changes have been Frost Mage and Survival. They both have increased 4 ranks compared to last week. And then we have the best of the increases, even though it's just 2 positions, because in the 2 position increase we have Destruction Warlock. This one is the best one simply because they go at the top. They go to be the better performing of DPS specs. Then we have the negatives. Then we have the specs that have decreased the most, that have lost the most compared to a couple of weeks ago. One is Havoc. Havoc has lost 4 positions compared to 2 weeks ago. This is still not too terrible. Where it starts to get quite terrible is Affliction. Affliction has quite often been ping-ponging back and forth simply because of how few logs there are of Affliction, so how easy it is to just constantly change your performance. Affliction lost 8 positions compared to 2 weeks ago. However, Affliction is not very played, so their logs are quite wonky and volatile. What about Subtlety? Because Subtlety is quite popular. Subtlety is not really bound to change super much because of logs not being many. Subtlety is the 7th most played spec right now in the raid. They are the 3rd most played melee spec in the raid right now. So there should be plenty of logs to record their performance. So why is it that Subtlety has lost 11 positions compared to 2 weeks ago? That's massive. Have they been nerfed? Have I missed something? Okay, this is the part where we explain why these changes are happening, at the very least to a degree. As I said, the bosses that are going to be introduced because we got more and more kills from them are Lihuvim, which is this one right here. You can see that some of the specs that we mentioned for improving in ranks are towards the top. You see Destruction, you see Frost, Death Knight, you see Survival Hunter. There is Red Paladin towards top half as well. After Lihuvim, there is Anduin. And once again, we see Destruction Warlock, we see Survival Hunter, we see Windwalker Monk, which also improved Frost Death Knight as well. What about the last two then? What about Lords of Dread? Lords of Dread, we have Destruction Warlock again, we have Survival again, we have Frost Death Knight again, and Red Paladin is also in the top half again. Specs that lost performance, as we mentioned, like Subtlety, like Havoc, are a little bit leaning towards the bottom side. Then you have Rygelon once again, and you do see another very good performance from Destruction Warlock. This is why, as we get more and more kills of these bosses, the damage ranking changes have been favoring these specs. These fights are quite chock full of AoE. So it's not surprising that we see specs like Ret, Frost DK, Windwalker, even Frost Mage Survival, and Destro itself improving significantly in their overall meters, because they are quite decent, quite good at AoE damage. You know, an easy spot to farm AoE is, for example, Anduin. Anduin has the 2 intermissions where a gigantic amount of adds are going to spawn, right? And the result is this. The result is that if you are a survival hunter, you can damn near get close to 300,000 DPS as you get into that phase. And the same, very similar discussion goes for Destro in that Anduin phase. Very high damage, very high AoE damage. So this is the result that gets you to spike up your damage when you look at the overall picture. Another thing for Destruction is that they can cheat. Destruction can cheat because, for example, they generally play Nightfey. In some situations, they play Necro. Those are the better options for them. However, how is it that every single Destro lock on Rygelon, the boss that gives them this, so much out of sync with the rest, so much of an overpowered performance, why is it that they are all Kyrian? Why did they all move to Kyrian for this fight, just for this fight? Well, Destro goes Kyrian here because it gets them high on LSD. Destro is able to chuck down tons of LSD because this fight has a lot of collapsing quasars. These are the little ball adds that try to reach the boss and you have to take them down over and over and over again. Kyrian gives you scoring tight. Scoring tight gives you a bunch of stuff, namely shards, if the target dies within the duration of the dot. This is not very good in single target fights or 2 target fights where the enemies stay alive for a long time, but this is perfect for Rygelon because of all the little adds dying constantly. What makes it strong is the LSD, because the Languishing Soul Detritus gives you 45% crit chance when the target dies affected by scoring tight. As you know, I'm sure you know, Destro locks have guaranteed crit with Chaos Bolt. The crit chance of a Destro lock is converted into crit damage for Chaos Bolt. So, getting your LSD to give you 45% crit chance on Chaos Bolt is huge, because it translates to 45% more damage. You're also playing with Madness of the Ajakir, which gives you even more damage, because you cast more of them and they do more damage themselves, which makes it a perfect fight for this Covenant. pretty much the only fight where this Covenant is the top pick for Destro. This is why, for example, Destro is also rising on Rigelon, even though they shouldn't be that strong in pure single target fights. Well, this is not quite a pure single target fight. They are kind of cheating by using illegal substances like LSD. Another example, of course, going back to the more standard damage profiles, the other example is Lords of Dread. As you know, they have the swarm phase where they take double damage. Now it's been nerfed, so they take double damage not just from AOE abilities, but also from single target abilities. But still, if you have strong AOE abilities, you're still going to outdo the players who do double damage on single target. So you do see quite decent, consistent AOE or burst AOE specs doing quite good on Lords of Dread as well, which of course includes Destruction, includes Survival, the two nerfed specs in AOE. These are not more than 8 targets, so the nerf doesn't exist here for them. Again, as we go forward and keep checking these results, it's always worth mentioning the difference that logs can make based on the popularity. For example, it is true that Red Paladin is one of the most improved, and it is true that Red Paladin is in the top half, for example, of Anduin. It's the, 7th best DPS on Anduin. That is true, but what is also true is that there are only 11 Red Paladin logs on Anduin, as opposed to the 298 of a Balanced Druid or the 197 of an Arcane Mage. So, yes, they have improved, but the amount of logs that show their improvement are very limited. So they might not be like this as more and more players get into the fight with the spec. Finally, we can close our raid review by looking at the kill percentage, i.e. how hard the bosses have been so far. It's quite interesting because we start in a pretty obvious manner. You start seeing that the easier bosses to defeat are Vigilant Guardian, Skolex, Dosen, Zymox, and Prototype Pantheon. That's pretty logical. It's a pretty smooth progression of difficulty. Where things start to get a little bit wonky is when you see that Lords of Dread is right after Prototype Pantheon. This, of course, might have to do with the aforementioned nerf I just pointed out, the much easier DPS push you can make because of the damage they can take more now in single target as well. So they are now in the middle of difficulty. After Lords of Dread, you have Lihuvim, so we continue with the previously scheduled progression. After Prototype Pantheon, there should be Lihuvim. But then we stop again. We stop again because after Lihuvim, there is no Halondrus. After Lihuvim, there is Rigelon and even Anduin. And only after Anduin, we see Halondrus. As a matter of fact, Halondrus is closer to the Jailer than it is to any other boss fight in difficulty. It is quite significant. You can see here the drop from the 4.2% of Lihuvim to the 1.3% of Rigelon and lower. So you do see quite some clear harder bosses, the bottom 4 bosses, with the outlier, the weird Lords of Dread, randomly being higher up because it got nerfed. I do think that the later half of the raid, though, has been better planned compared to Sanctum, for example. Many people, when they saw the difficulty of Alondrus, thought, oh, let's hope this is not going to be a Painsmith 2.0. Let's hope that after Alondrus we are not going to get another cakewalk of bosses like Guardian of the First Ones or like Kel'Thuzad. Even though, as we see here, Lords of Dread and Rigelon are easier than Alondrus, they are definitely not Guardian of the First Ones or Kel'Thuzad. So there is a better progression curve than Sanctum, and I would say because of how triggering Stone Legion was in Castornatria, there is also a better progression curve than in Castornatria. So far, so good when it comes to raid difficulty. This was all we can see for the raid at the end of this weekend and in the middle of this reset of 9.2. As always, we will probably go after Mythic Plus as well, talk about this week a little bit, since it is a pretty good week for pushing keys. So for now, this was the overall picture for the raid. Thank you guys for watching the video and for helping to support the channel. You can, of course, contribute more by liking and commenting on the video as well as subscribing to the channel. Given that this is a raid-specific video, everyone who has been raiding, at the very least this week, up to 8 bosses for the Vault can subscribe to the channel. Also, once again, I am on Twitter for no reason whatsoever, and you can also support me even more on Patreon. This time around, the monetary contribution of my gentle viewers is going to go towards buying straws that fit my bottle. Thank you guys again, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, this is what I mean. You see, it's too short. It just falls down and it gets kind of annoying. Okay, so I need solutions for this.